How to pray. That is on page 86, in the middle of the page. So we had just finished at the end of the day inventory. Actually, he says when we retire at night, so that's what I've come to call it over the years, because it's using his words. You're not putting your own little spin on it. It's the when we retire at night inventory of step 11. Same inventory, just the time frame is different. We review the entire day. We're in the middle of the page there, a little past the middle. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. And this is the directions for how to pray in step 11. I've been to a lot of meetings where they read St. Francis' prayer of, St. Francis of Assisi, and they call that the 11th step prayer, they call that. But that's really not the 11th step prayer. That's a religious prayer. And even when I just read, we are not allied, what's it saying? We're not allied with any sect. That part means religion. We are not allied with any religious sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. But that's a pretty good one. When it says, "Let me be the giver instead of the taker in almost all aspects," so you can't put something like that down. But this is the actual directions for the 11th step prayer. Because, when you read something like that, all you're really doing is just saying, where there's darkness, let me bring light, and where there's doubt, let me bring, whatever. I don't even remember. Anyway, this is actually going to give us actual directions on relieve me of self, just like the 3rd step prayer, just like the 7th step prayer, where we realized that when we made a decision to turn our lives over to the care of God, and then we went to the 4th step to find what was blocking us from turning our lives over to the care of God, on the premise that we were going to be, as he puts it, an agent of God's, in the 3rd step prayer, to be I think he says, take away my difficulties, that victory over them will bear witness to, and this is what we're trying to be in AA. Let me go back to the 3rd step and read it for you, so it's not like, that would be 63. 63. The 3rd step prayer on 63 says that those I would help. This is what we're trying to do in the 3rd step prayer. Those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life, may I do thy will always. So we're looking to find what keeps us from doing this. What is it about me as a person that keeps me from being from helping the people that I would help of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life? Okay, so we've done the inventory, and this is the way that it was explained to me, that he actually says here, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Now, I've been accused around here of being somebody who talks directly to God by some of the nut jobs that float around here. And I've never said that I talk to God. What I said is, I've always maintained this, that what we're doing is we're trying to take our best educated guess at what God wants us to do with our lives. And remember in the 3rd step prayer, the idea that we're going to be an agent of God's outpouring unconditional love towards the people in our lives, towards other people. That's what we're trying to do. And what blocks us from doing that, number 1, is anger. And number 2 is fear. And number 3 is guilt. And from those most common manifestations of self stem all the other subforms. Therefore, we only focus on those 3, on the premise that when we get straightened out, when we deal with our anger, and we are no longer angry about the things that are making us angry. When we deal with our fear and we're no longer afraid at the level that we were. No one can ever have complete freedom from fear. Even Bill has said that repeatedly throughout some of the other literature, that no one can achieve full freedom from fear, but we can achieve a level of freedom from that fear that will no longer require us to drink it away. Because the way I understand recovery is, the way it was taught to me, was that fear is at the root cause of the obsession for the first drink. When you see an alcoholic go out and drink, what made them do that was fear. The fears in their life got bigger and bigger and bigger, and living in fear is very painful. And how do we get rid of that pain? The way that my first sponsor used to say, he had pop quiz that he'd always tell his sponsees, and he'd say, what age did you start drinking? And I said the same thing everybody said. I said, I don't know, about 12, 13 years old. And he says, that's right. You know what? Almost everybody starts drinking at that same age. Why is that? Because there's a transition that all of us are going through at that point in our lives. We are making a transition from a child into an adult, you understand? And then he proceeded to go over the steps with me and say, now, what type of behavior is it that a child exhibits? Anger, fear, and guilt for what it is that they've done to other people. What kind of behavior is it that an adult might exhibit? An outpouring, unconditional, genuine concern for other people, unconditional love for other people. That's the behavior of an adult. So what we've really done is we've bypassed the idea of growing from the child to an adult with the experiences that life was going to deal with us, and instead, when things happened, we drank it away. When someone in my family or someone I knew died, we had a big drinking party, man. When anything that happened in our lives, we head straight for the bottle and drink it away, because alcohol kills the pain of the fear that is. And that's the way that Alcoholics Anonymous works on getting to the underlying causes and conditions, not of the addiction that we have to this alcohol, this craving that our body has. We have to free ourselves of the craving for alcohol through the detoxification and hospitalization. And once that's done, it's purely a matter of conquering the obsession that develops for the first one on the premise that it's based in fear. Now, this how to pray in step 11 is based on we've just done the inventory. And the paragraph ahead of that, the 11-step inventory. We have found our anger, we have found our fear, and we have found our guilt. And we've applied the spiritual solutions as they were outlined in the previous steps. And step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all brought forward into step 11 to do this daily inventory. And the way he puts it, he says that our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane. What's a higher plane? The God's plane. The plane we're trying to get closer to the God of, right? We're trying to establish a relationship with a loving and caring God. And one of the things that Bill writes is each one of us has established a relationship, and we feel the presence of a loving Creator and God in our lives, and that He is actually concerned with what's going on with us on a daily basis. It's not just a matter of, random events happening in our lives. It's actually orchestrated. Everything is orchestrated by God. He's taken care, except for, of course, our free will to do whatever we want to do. It's the only thing that He's not in control of. But I actually feel that in my life when I start to think of others and do for others, and that's the idea behind the 12 steps here. So in this next paragraph here, he's going to tell us that we're going to ask God, when we wake up in the morning, please help me to be free of self. I cannot be free of self without God's aid. And self is what we're talking about. Selfishness and self-centeredness is the root cause of alcoholism. It's the child and that I never learned to outgrow. And the most common forms of that, like we were saying, was anger, fear, and guilt. How we get rid of anger, fear, and guilt is through forgiveness, outlined out in step 4 and in 7. And making amends outlined in steps 8 and 9. And remember that they're all tied together, too, because the admission in 5 is an important part of this. So let's read this paragraph here and see where he says, on awakening, which is, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning when you get up. This is the AM prayer. And let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, now remember, this is the 11th-step prayer, how to pray. In step 11, we are instructed to pray and meditate. The next paragraph is how to meditate after this. Before we begin, we ask God, and whenever you see him say we ask God, this is a reference to turning to God and talking to God. We ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. That's almost contradictory to that idea. A lot of people come in here and they say, my best thinking got me here. And I don't know where that came from, but it's like one of those things that people pick up and run with because, hey, that was cute. Pick it up and run with it. My best thinking got me here. And in order to really get a good look at it, you could invert that and say, okay, so all you got to do is remain stupid and not learn anything in AA. You just sit there and don't learn nothing, and you got it made. But the more you learn, the smarter you get, the more about AA you know, the closer you are to a drink. It's stupid. I mean, it's the only thing I can think of is that they're trying to get a point across when they say something like that, but they're not doing a very good job of it. And I'll tell you what I mean is they're trying to stay humble by saying, you know, it's beyond my ability to comprehend the inner workings of God. You know, he's just beyond my level of comprehension. Therefore, you know, they say something like, my best thinking got me here. And by inverting that and saying, okay, so all you got to do is stay away from your best thinking and you got it made, is almost like, you know, not thinking about what you're saying. But what they need to do when they say something like that is to go further. My best thinking while I was drinking got me here, but my best thinking when I'm sober is going to get me out of it and keep me sober. But I understand that there's a you know, there's like an idea behind that where they're trying to get some kind of humility in there, but it kind of overshoots it there. But anyway, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life. Now, this is that little sentence I was talking about. This is saying that when I clear my thinking of wrong motives, my thought life will be on a much higher plane. He says, our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. Wrong motives being selfish and self-centered, right motives being selfless and self-sacrificing and giving of yourself for others. My only reason for living is to serve the people in my life. And that, to me, is what AA has given me. And I tell you what, if you were to make a list of reasons for living, I'd have to say that was the best one I've heard. Other than, you know, myself is like the one that I always had before that. So what he's saying here is my thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when my thinking is cleared of wrong motives, is that when I turn to God in step 11 and say, what do you want me to do? Because read what it says. It says, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. So what he's saying is I'm trying to improve my contact with God. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn to God and say, what do you want me to do? I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of you, God. What is it that you want me to do? So you're not going to hear the voice in your head, you know, God in a burning bush or something, and no one hears what God says. You're going to take your best educated guess. Having heard nothing in your head when you turn to God and say, what do you want me to do? You're going to say, well, let me try to figure it out on my own here. My thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when my thinking is cleared of wrong motives, means I have just done the inventory. I have cleared my mind of my anger, of my fears, and of my guilt that I have stirring around in my head like that mouse on the wheel going round and round. Now I've cleared my head of those wrong thinking, of those wrong motives, selfish, self-centered motives. I'm in a much better position to receive the correct answer when I take my best educated guess about what God wants me to do. He wants me to do things for others and to sacrifice everything that I am to give to my community and to the people that are in my life. And that's the answer that's going to come to you. And you can usually cheat and go to old people who've been around and sober for a long time and ask them what God's will is. But essentially we are asking, and you know, you can even see it in the third step, like we were just saying, that he says, take away my difficulties, that victory over my difficulties. And when we say difficulties, we're talking about the things that are blocking us something that is between me and God, that's blocking me from this relationship with a God of my understanding. And that is the most common manifestations of self that block me from being a selfless, self-sacrificing person. So this next paragraph is how to meditate, how to sit and come up with the answer of, you just ask God what to do. To me, it's pretty self-explanatory where it says, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve your conscious contact with God. So I thought through talking to God and waiting for an answer, how to improve my relationship with God, how to improve my conscious contact with Him. And then he proceeds to tell you how to do that. You pray only for one thing and one thing only, the knowledge of God's will for you and the power to carry that out. So this is what it is. You're sitting here now. You've just prayed to God and said, what do you want me to do? You've done the inventory. You've gotten rid of the selfish, self-centered behavior. And you turned to God and said, what do you want me to do? And you're going to waiting for the answer. You're thinking, what does God want me to do? What does God want me to do? And this is what he says. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Now, this could be anything. Anything in your daily life that's giving you trouble. Here we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought or decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised at how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. And he's going to tell us here that some people make mistakes, but if you have the honest desire to become a better person and grow and learn from those mistakes, then that's a part of growing up, is making mistakes here. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God. So see, he's making a flat-out statement that we have made a conscious contact with God. And part of this is because we're bringing God into our daily lives with the three spiritual solutions that we spoke of in the previous steps. The spiritual solutions of forgiveness, making amends, and faith in God. Those spiritual solutions bring God into our lives because we have ourselves, another human being, God, and action. Those four aspects are vital to these spiritual solutions. We must have ourselves, like he says in the fifth step. It's easy to see it in the fifth step, but it's also in forgiveness and making amends and faith in God. We have these four aspects of the spiritual solutions. We must bring God into these and ask God to help us with it because we cannot be free of self without his aid. It states that in the third step. We must be free of self, and we cannot be free of self without God's aid. Why is that? That's a question right there. I might say to myself, how come I can't be free of self without God's aid? Because all life has an instinct for self-preservation. I have a sort of an analogy that I use that like Bill Wilson has his analogies where he says we're all like the passengers of a steamliner as it just sank, and everybody feels like they're camaraderie, like they've been through the same common peril. That's why one alcoholic can help another alcoholic like nobody else can, because we've all experienced. You say to yourself, well, you've been through what I've been through, so we can relate to one another. And then he has the analogy of a guy who owns a business and he has to take an inventory or his business isn't going to make it. And then he has the analogy of the jaywalker who keeps skipping out in front to get that high adrenaline rush of running out in front of fast-moving vehicles. Well, the analogy that I have is an analogy of the room is on fire, and there's about 200 of us in here. And I am not going to make a decision to put my foot on your face on the way out that door, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm running on instinct. I do not make a decision to get angry. I get angry because something happens and I'm reacting. No one sits down and goes, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get mad about this. No one gets afraid. No one makes a decision to be afraid. You are experiencing a threat to you, and you instinctually you are reacting out of fear. You understand that? Nobody makes a decision to feel guilty. If you do something that hurts another person, you don't get to decide whether if you're a normal human being and you have a conscience, you do not get to decide whether you feel guilty about it or not. If you have done something that has harmed another human being, you feel guilty about it, and that's all there is to it. It's not a decision that you get to make, just like the fear thing. But we do have a way of retraining our minds how to react to these things, how to react to anger, how to react. He says in the ninth step, the promise is the ninth step. He says we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us because we are practicing this principle in all our affairs. And the regular practice of forgiveness on the things that I'm going through on a daily basis. Someone gets me angry, I learn to forgive. Maybe I spend an hour or two in it, but I get out of it. And over the period of time, weeks, months, and years, I gradually learn how to forgive without stopping to think about it. I don't have to go, well, I just got pissed off about something. I need to deal with that anger. That's what's blocking me from being a loving, caring person of outflowing, unconditional love for the God of my understanding. Therefore, I need to forgive this person and get rid of that anger. Not because I'm a bad person, but because this is what's blocking me from a relationship with the God of my understanding. Anger is like a number one thing. So through the practice of regular forgiveness, you will intuitively know how to handle that situation. That when something crops up, and remember, no one makes a decision to get angry. You're experiencing a reaction to something that's happening into your life. But you can reteach your subconscious mind, and that's one of the things that Bill Wilson states in Comes of Age. He said that one of the best description that he heard of psychiatry was the study of the inner workings of the subconscious human mind, why we do the things we do, and how we can get to that subconscious part of our mind and reteach ourselves how to deal with these things because we must be free of them. We must get rid of this fear, because the fear is at the root of my obsession for that first drink. If in the future, now that I'm completely detoxed and I have none of this stuff in my body, if I get the obsession to take that first one, it is going to come from fear. Fear is going to be the driving force that is at the root of that. Where did that come? You can have one drink and you look around and go, where the hell did that come from? I can't have a drink. I know I can't drink. And then 2 hours later, you got a drink in your hand and you're going, what the hell happened? That's how it happened for me. I swore I wasn't going to drink, and I looked down and there was a beer in my hand, and I said, what in the hell happened? But at the root of that, we believe, is fear, okay? And we're going to deal with that fear through being an agent of God's outpouring unconditional love towards other people. That will free you of the fear, being on the idea that fear is based in self. All fear is based in self. Anyway, back to what we were reading here. He says, what used to be the hunch or the occasional, this is the top of 87, or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. You see what he's saying there? What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind, which means now that I am living my life with forgiveness and making amends when I've harmed other people and having faith in God when I'm afraid, this is going to gradually become a working part of my mind. I'm going to teach myself how to handle these situations intuitively. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we are going to be inspired at all times. We might pay for this presumption with all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, he's saying there we're going to learn from our mistakes. You're going to make mistakes, and you're going to look at it and go, man, that didn't work out too good. Let's learn from that. But if someone makes a mistake and says, oh, to hell with it, I really don't care, that's not the right idea. You have to try to become a better person, a more giving person, caring person, loving person. We find that our thinking... Now, this is one of the things, look what he says here. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. This is on the assumption that we're not just sitting in an AA meeting and hanging out. This is on the assumption that we are actually practicing these spiritual solutions in our life every day, that I am learning to forgive people when they make me angry. I am learning to have faith in God when I am afraid of things, and I am learning to make amends when I harm other people. That is what he says. This is the point in which my thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. And guess what? The same thing holds true if I am not doing this. If I am not getting rid of my anger through forgiveness, and I am not getting rid of my fear through faith in God, and I'm not getting rid of my guilt through making amends for it, then you can say that the exact opposite is going to happen. That I will not get closer to God, and I will not have the inspiration. My thinking will not be on the plane of inspiration. And we conclude this period of meditation, which he just described, with a prayer that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be, that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. We especially ask for freedom from self-will and are careful to make no request for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. We are careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that, and it doesn't work. You can easily see why. Now, most people can easily see why, but I got to tell you, when my head was warped with the selfishness and the self-centeredness, I wouldn't have made heads or tails out of that. I used to see stories on the news where recently there was one on CNN where some guy was a doctor and his kids were grown and off and they had gone to college and they were raising, and he had like millions of dollars. So his wife died, he sells everything he owns and moves to some town in Africa and sets up a little hospital where he's treating these people with his own millions and is gradually going away. And my first thought was, that guy's out of his mind. He went off the deep end. He's lost his mind. He's off his rocker. He's marbles. But now, today, the way I see it, I go, I understand that now. Because he's getting more from helping those people with that money that he had than he ever could have with just sitting on that money and whatever he had in his life here in the United States. That the reward of doing something for other people like that is just... It's just a feeling inside that blows that feeling from dope sideways, or the alcohol, or whatever it is. If circumstances warrant, just a couple more minutes. If circumstances warrant, we asked our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we have been discussing, which would be like that St. Francis of Assisi, which, like I said, that's a really good prayer, but many people... you see, the thing is, when you read that, when someone says, let's read the 11th step prayer, and they proceed to read the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, there's no direction in there on what to do other than, let me be this instead of that. Let me be this instead of that. Whereas in here, when you read the 11th step prayer, it actually says that I turn to God and I say to God, please help me be free of my self-seeking motives. And that it's also coupled with the inventory that we've just done. We actually have specific directions on something you're going to do, other than just the thought of, hey, if where there's darkness, let me bring light. I mean, it's a great prayer, but there's no actual direction on what to do. Therefore, in my opinion, it is not the 11th-step prayer. It's like he says here, to select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we have been discussing. There are many helpful books also, and I don't know if you guys haven't heard of it, the one book that made a big difference in AA was the Varieties of Religious Experience, which short was the turning point for Bill. But when Ebby Thatcher, he says Ebby gave him the book, and he wasn't sure about it, but he thinks it was. When Ebby gave him that book, that was the turning point in his life in which he stopped drinking and never had another drink, was when he read Varieties of Religious Experience, William James. And that book was given to Roland Hazard, who went to, what was that place? Where the Dr. Jung was from, Holland or something like that, Sweden. Dr. Jung was a Swedish psychiatrist and it all really came from Dr. Jung in Sweden with that book, when that book was given to. But that's one of the books that he's talking about here when he says there are many helpful books also. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one's priest, minister, or rabbi. Be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. We're going to stop there, and the spiritual axiom down here in the next page, that when you're agitated, that's when you need to do that inventory and find what's wrong with you. Whenever you find fault in others, that's where you need to look inward for the solution. But anyway, so that was some of the directions and some of the insight that I've been given over the years about. Remember that when we turn to God and say, what do you want me to do? You're not going to hear God tell you what to do. You're going to take your best educated guess on the idea that you have done the inventory and gotten rid of what blocks you from God, which is selfishness and self-centeredness. And anyway, we'll open up the floor. We got 24 minutes for open. We're at the bottom of page 87. As we go through the day, we pause. Remember, we're in the 11th step in this area of the book, and the 11th step can be read on the board behind me here. I always said, when I first looked at it, it was mysterious, and today when I see it, it's pretty self-explanatory. It gives you the answer, right? It says that having had his, no, not says 12th step. It says that you're going to seek through prayer and meditation to improve your conscious contact with God, praying only for the knowledge of His wisdom for you and the power to carry that out. Now, the idea is that we're looking to get closer to God. And you're going to turn to God and ask Him what He wants you to do. It's that simple. It's not a matter of, any kind of, what was the word, the spiritual calculus. This isn't like some kind of spiritual calculus. He's saying that you're going to try to get closer to God, and you're going to turn to God, and you're going to ask Him what He wants you to do. But before you do that, you're going to do the inventory that comes before these, the 11th step there, like the 10th step inventory, 4 through 9. This is the idea. You have done an inventory. You have found what it is that blocks you from receiving and doing God's will. The most common manifestations of self, they are anger, fear, and guilt. You have applied the spiritual solutions outlined. In step 5, you've admitted it. In step 6 and 7, we've learned how to forgive the people that we're angry with. In steps 8 and 9, we have learned how to make amends for the harm that we have done others. And we're getting to a specific step here, and that specific step here is the 12th step. But the whole reason for all of the first 11 steps is to bring us to the 12th step. And you've just asked God in step 11 what it is that you want him to do, okay? And the answer to that question is the very next step. You see, you're asking God in step 11, what do you want me to do? And the answer to that question is given to you. He wants you to bring other people to him. I can easily see it in my life, that my life was upside down. I'd gotten to the point that I just didn't want to do this anymore, okay? I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't have any answers. I was at the end of my rope, I was at the end of my life. So somebody helped me find my way to God, and now I have like a new reason for living, and I think I can do the next 30 years standing on my head, next 30, 40 years, whatever it is. So now, having found my way out, I'm to turn around and help the people in behind me. That's what it's essentially saying. That the answer to the question, what do you want me to do, God, is step 12. The answer to step 11's question. You see, you're looking to improve your conscious contact with God, and you don't improve your conscious contact with God with something that goes on in your head. Bill Wilson wrote in the next chapter, where we're going to be here in a few minutes, that faith, to be vital, he says, faith alone is insufficient. That faith must be accompanied by constructive, self-sacrificing action. And that is step 12. So faith alone is insufficient. I think he's talking about a man who, in the story, there's one of the people you may help in the future, and he says, although his training in spiritual matters may be far superior than yours, he may have the question of how come his ways have failed and yours have worked. And the answer to that question is that we have a specific set of directions on how to sacrifice our lives to help others through the 12 steps. And that's how we get closer. That's how I improve my conscious contact with God, is by bringing other people to God. And it's a very simple way. It's a very simple explanation, and it's actually nowhere in the book. It was given to me by someone who I think had a lot of credibility and a lot of sobriety, and he claimed to have taken over 2,000 people individually through the steps, and I believed him. Because how can you say that Dr. Bob took some 5,000 with only 15 years of sobriety, or that Dr. Silkworth had over 40,000 people? If you'll read Comes of Age, it says Dr. Silkworth had 12-stepped, I think it says. Dr. Silkworth had 12-stepped over 40,000 alcoholics at that hospital in New York before he died. But here's the idea here is, my problem as an alcoholic, all of our problems, is that our ego restores itself. That we are smashed by alcohol, and within a short period of time, our ego restores itself to its former glory, and all of a sudden, we got this thing licked. I can handle it, and then eventually, I convince myself that I can have one drink. I'm strong enough. Look at, I made it through that last Mass. I can do it this time. And it happens just like Lucy and the football and the peanuts, over and over and over again. I continue to, because it happened to me, I would have to say it hundreds of times, where I swore off I would never take another drink as long as I lived, and within a week, it was usually the period of time between I was done with alcohol and I swear to you I will never take another drink, to the time that I had a drink in my hand was usually the next time I got paid. The next time I had money in my hand was the next time that I drank alcohol. So, but I was delivered this initial ego deflation, which we call step 1. And this initial ego deflation would not last. It would not keep me sober, but for a short period of time. The fear of what would happen to me. So what Alcoholics Anonymous does for us is it gives us what Dr. What Dr. Thibaut coined was a continued source of ego deflation. What these alcoholics have in Alcoholics Anonymous is a continuing source for ego deflation, one that you never complete this thing. It's a lifetime commitment, that every time you think you're done with the last guy that you sponsored through the 12 steps, in comes another one through the front door there, and you've got another one on your hands, and you never finish with 12-stepping people. It's a lifetime commitment. And that there's an added benefit that is absolutely vital to permanent recovery, and that is this ego deflation of bringing another alcoholic, another person, to a God of their understanding is both proof positive that I no longer believe that I am the God of this world or in charge of anything, and I have submitted my will to this God of this world. So through that process is what we're doing here, and we're going to be reading for this whole next chapter about some of the details of working with others, the whole chapter. So we got here in the chapter we're reading now, Into Action, There's steps 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All 7 of those steps are in this chapter. And in the previous chapter of how it works, there are 2 steps, step 3 and step 4. And then the previous chapter, we agnostics, there's only 1 step, the second step. And then the 2 chapters prior to that, more about alcoholism, and there is a solution, is step 1. Actually, all throughout the book is a lot of step 1 material, but those, when we read just tonight, he read more about alcoholism. It clearly says that this is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe, has to be smashed. But here tonight, we're on the bottom of page 87. We're finishing up the 11th step. We're going to start into step 12. And we've just finished the 3 paragraphs here. There's 3 paragraphs dedicated and explaining. Actually, I think there's 2 paragraphs, but these other 2 sort of ended up here. How to meditate. How to pray is 1 paragraph, and on page 86 in the middle, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. That's step 11, how to pray. And step 11, how to meditate, is on the bottom of 86, and thinking about our day, we may face indecision. So here we are tonight at the bottom of page 87. As we go through the day, we pause when agitated. And I've heard people refer to that as the spiritual axiom of Alcoholics Anonymous. The call to action is whenever you find something wrong with anything, whether it's some guy on the road or some political thing that's going on or whatever it is that's out there. This is what he says, that you're agitated, and this is when we pause here. As we go through the day, we pause. When agitated or doubtful, we ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show. And that's one of the aspects of the 12th step, is it is a constant reminder that we are no longer running the show. It's a continuing source for this ego deflation. Humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, "Thy will be done." We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. It works, it really does. We alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way we have just outlined. So how is it that God disciplines us? He disciplines us through an inventory that we do to find what's blocking us from becoming a person who is a source of God's, how does he put it in a 3rd step prayer? Take away my difficulties, that I may bear witness to those, that I may serve, that I may help of thy love, thy way of life, and thy power. We're looking to be an agent of God's outpouring unconditional love towards other people. And what blocks us from that is selfishness and self-centeredness, and the primary forms that it takes in alcoholics: anger, fear, and guilt, which I believe isn't just alcoholics, that's everybody. From those 3 stem all the other forms. But this is not all. There is action and more action. Now this, you see here, faith without works is dead. That is the description of why we set out on this commitment to help others through the 12 steps. That faith without works is dead. The next chapter is entirely devoted to step 12. Faith without works is dead means that I cannot think my way to a faith in God. And I don't know exactly where that is. Oh, here it is. Page 93. Go to page 93, right about 10 lines up from the bottom. Now, this is what I was telling you earlier. This is about this guy who is a very religious man, and he fails to stay sober. He continues to get drunk. And in the middle of that bottom paragraph, he says, he may be an example of the truth. I don't know if you guys are following me there. I'm about 11 lines up from the bottom on page 93. He may be an example of the truth that faith alone is insufficient. To be vital, faith must be accompanied by self-sacrifice and unselfish constructive action. Back to the front of the 89, page 89, the beginning of chapter 7, working with others. Now remember that all the first 11 steps are bringing us to this last, the 12th step. It's their sole reason for existence. That's why we do an inventory in step 4 to get us to step 12. That's why we in step 1 admit complete defeat and a complete deflation of our ego by our alcoholism is all designed to get us to this point right here, to allow us to submit our will to God and direct our attention to what we think He wants us to do, okay? Another thing is, before we start working with others, let me take you back to, I want you to see This is in the chapter. That's not really a chapter. It's a foreword to the second edition. Forward to the second edition on, I don't know. I have an older book. Mine says XVI. I don't know what XVII might be. I'm not familiar with the page differences in the, because they've changed these forward page numbers. But here's another one. This is a new book. You guys probably got newer books. My book's like from 1989 or something. The difference between the page in my book and the difference in the page of your book. I'm looking for something in the forward to XVI. No, it's the same page. So it's on page XVI at the bottom. On the bottom of the page XVI, in the forward to the second edition, it says here, the physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker, now this is Dr. Bob and Bill Wilson here, but when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster, which is just simply saying that Bill Wilson helped Dr. Bob see the fatal nature. Dr. Bob always thought that he wasn't going to die from it. He'd beat it eventually. But Bill Wilson explained to him, you're done. It's over with without this. He sobered never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. And this is the point that I was getting to right here. It says, this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Now, those words there are very profound. Remember that Bill Wilson has 6 months of sobriety at this point right here. He has 6 months of sobriety and had, as the book puts it, had worked with dozens of prospects and failed to sober any of them up. But Bill stayed sober himself, okay? And when he met Dr. Bob, he got Dr. Bob sober, and the two of them, this is what it says there on the very next paragraph there. Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving at the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3, which if you'll read, he's really not the very next one. The next one drank. The third guy drank, but Bill Dobson was the fourth guy. That's in Comes of Age. But Bill Dobson was the third guy to get sober. There was a guy before him. But the point being, look what he says here. It says that the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics. How many people do you see come in here look like they're working with others frantically? And then we stand around and go, why nobody makes it around here? Gee, I wonder why nobody makes, because no one's explaining to them how important it is that you go after other alcoholics to help them. There's something about this. It says here, it also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And then you wonder why nobody's got permanent recovery, why everybody falls by the wayside, because they're not going to work frantically upon alcoholics. Everybody that I know says the same thing, that they need to become almost a master of the 12 steps before you can start teaching them. And I tell the people that I work with, look, if you're waiting to become some sort of master of teaching the 12 steps before you start helping other alcoholics, you have put yourself in a position in which you cannot help others until you learn about the 12 steps. And guess what? You're not going to learn about the 12 steps until you start helping others. Because in my opinion, they grow simultaneously. I had an argument with a friend, a couple of years back about the 12th step, where it says, and it does actually say, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, at that point we then tried to carry this message to other alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And what that might be saying to one person is, you cannot start helping other people until you have had a spiritual awakening that is a result of these steps, because how can you explain to another alcoholic how to have a spiritual awakening if you yourself have not had one? And my answer to that question is, at what point do you start to measure your spiritual awakening? At what point can you stop and say, that was the day that I had the spiritual awakening, and at that point, then I started helping other people? Because no one has ever measured, except for maybe Bill Wilson says that he was sitting in the hospital and a powerful white light seemed to light up the room, and he had felt the powerful conviction and presence of God and never had the obsession from that point on. I had something similar to that happen to me, but it wasn't anything I could not actually say that that was the day I had a spiritual awakening. That was just a day that the last time I ever had a thought of a drink was what that was for me. Because I've had some really up and down times in my 20 years of of sobriety. And the point that I'm trying to make is that you can't really measure the day that you had that spiritual awakening. That I believe that the spiritual awakening starts as this little, what do they call the mustard seed? There's a lot of talk about the mustard seed group, but it starts out and then it grows into the spiritual awakening that you're experiencing today. That it's always at a growing. It's always growing forward, it's always getting bigger and bigger and better and bigger. Either that or it's, staying stagnant. But for me, it's been a growing process. And I believe it to be going together with helping others through the 12 steps. That you don't wait to have a spiritual experience. You start helping others like your life depends upon it, and the two of them together will grow your spiritual experience along with your ability to help others and to teach others. And at no point do you actually, say to yourself, okay, I've had this, and now I'm going to start helping other people. I think it's more a matter of most of the people that I work with, like say somebody takes 6 weeks to do their fourth step, and that's a pretty good indication of just how important it is to them that they stay sober. And other guys call me the next day and go, I got it done. I stayed up late last night. When do you want to get together? And I say, let's do it right now. What are you doing? We'll meet over here at the park right now. And see, the difference is that there's 6 weeks on this one guy, and he doesn't say when we getting together. He just, I finished it. Okay, I'll see you later. And this other guy calls me up the very next day at 7 o'clock in the morning and says, I'm done. Let's go. There's a difference between the motivation that these two people have. But and it's the same difference that I'm talking about in people that start sponsoring people and people that sit back and go, I really don't think I'm ready for that right now. Damn, why did I relapse again? What the hell happened? But anyway, so we're in the chapter working with others, and remember that this is not spiritual calculus. There's a lot in here in this chapter about how to find people to work with, because when this book came out in 39, there was no AA meetings. There was one or two. There was one in New York, one in Akron, and one in Cleveland. And to get to any one of those three was not easy. So this book is expected. Remember, one of the things about this book is it's expected to be your sponsor. This book was written to be your guide through the steps, your sponsor, on the premise that you were in Butte, Montana, or in Los Angeles, California, and there was like that guy out in California now who's selling that new cure for alcoholism. He's got one building out there called The Passages, but he sells his books in Cleveland or wherever. And where do you go to his meetings at? I don't know. You have to go out to Los Angeles, or where is that thing? Somewhere out there. Anyway, let me take you to, just real quick before we start, I'll be done in about 5 minutes, and you guys can share on what we're reading. A Vision for You. The second to last page of A Vision for You is where it actually says. Go to 163 at the top. This is where it actually tells us that this book is to be our sponsor, and that's one of the primary things that this chapter, Working with Others, is doing, is telling us where to find people, how to deal with them, what to do when you get this type of person, what to do when you get that type of person to work with. On the bottom of page 162, there's the sentence that starts this little paragraph here. It says, "Thus we grow, and so can you. Though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin." So it doesn't say, though you be but one man following your sponsor around, listening to his directions. It says, though you be but one man with this book in your hand. This book was written and designed to be your sponsor through the steps. But I do recommend somebody who knows more about it explaining it to you, because I've had dozens of people explaining this thing to me, and it's taken me a long time to comprehend a lot of the stuff that I do about this. So back to Working with Others on page 89, we're going to start this chapter, and there are 15 pages, and most of this chapter is roughly about how to find these people with priests, ministers, rabbis, sanitariums, hospitals, and what type of person you may find and how to deal with these individual types of people. Working with Others, chapter 7. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. And you have to ask yourself this question is why? Why does this work when other activities fail? How come nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics? Because ego is at the root. Fear is at the root. of that obsession for the first drink. And how we combat that fear is a very simple. We submit our will to God, and we keep our ego down with a humility of that submission. One of my favorite terms that I've come across came from a guy that I looked up to a lot, and he used the term submission to God's will. Submit your will to God's will, and you will reduce your ego. It will be a source of continued ego deflation, a source of continued humility, and this will keep that obsession from coming back on the premise that that obsession is rooted in fear, and all fear is based in self. So that's why working with others, there's a lot more to it than that, but those are some of the basic, some of the basic ideas. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. Remember, it says you can help when no one else can was basically because one alcoholic feels this connected to another alcoholic because we have suffered the same common peril. That if a doctor was trying to explain to you how to reduce your ego and to find what blocks you, he probably wouldn't. That was one of the problems, was that the medical profession never really cross-referenced anything with the religion, and religion never really cross-referenced anything with the medical profession. And it wasn't until Alcoholics Anonymous came along that he kind of took all three of them, put them together, and Bill Wilson made a statement that Alcoholics Anonymous really is a culmination and is born of medicine, psychiatry, and religion, and we've taken the best of all three aspects that we could use and combined them together to make our program. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. Life will take on new meaning to watch other people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. Perhaps you are not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. You can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, or hospitals. They will be only too glad to assist you. Don't start out as an evangelist or reformer, though. Unfortunately, a lot of prejudice exists. You will be handicapped if you arouse it. Ministers and doctors are competent, and you can learn much from them if you wish. But it happens that because of your own drinking experience, you can be uniquely useful to other alcoholics. So, cooperate, never criticize. To be helpful is our only aim. I don't want to take up too much, so let me think for a minute. Yeah, one of the things I'm going to be repeating over the next few weeks is a personal experience of my own. And, there was a time in my sobriety when I really didn't have many people ask me for help, didn't have many people ask me for sponsorship. Once in a blue moon, maybe once a year or something. But there was an event that took place, and one of them was I started learning more about the steps because I had to. It was either that or drink. And the other event was that I began to stop talking about myself. I was asked to speak in a meeting sometime in 96 or 97, and I spoke only of myself, and afterwards I really didn't feel any better. I had a knot in my stomach, and I came across a guy who spoke about the steps, and I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about the steps. And I learned more about the steps, and I talked more about the steps. And from that point, probably the next time I was asked to speak at a meeting, I spoke only of the steps and only of God and spirituality and details. That's one of the things I started doing, was actually giving details like the most common manifestations of self block us from being selfless and self-sacrificing, giving, understanding person. And I started to get literally, at one meeting that I would speak in, 5 people would ask me for sponsorship, I'd say, God, 5 people all at once. This place must have no sponsorship at all here. This place must be really bad or something. And then I began to notice that when I talk about things like, I can literally go to some meetings and have 3 people ask me to sponsor them sometimes. So sometimes I have to watch what I say, and I just want to, I want to say something. I don't want to say something that sounds more like, boo-hoo, poor me, or listen to my problems thing, because I know that doesn't help me. I'm supposed to be giving those problems to God and directing my attention to helping others. But it's also, sometimes I got 5 or 6 people I'm working with, and I just think, no, I don't. I'm going to keep my hands down. I might have 8 or 9 people to be working with after this meeting. But the point being is that, so he points us to priests, ministers, rabbis, hospitals, sanitariums. They would only be too happy to direct you towards some alcoholics that you can help. And I have to tell you, I've only met one guy who's ever done that, and he went off the deep end here recently, and with the religious thing. Okay, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that if you want to go the religious route, but I think he went a little further than that too. I think it went almost to the point of, maybe he's going to need some more help soon. But the point being, how to get sponsees is to take your problems to God with the process of the steps, the inventory, the spiritual solutions. I bring my problems to God, and then I come to a meeting and I try to think of others. How can I help? I always think, there's a room full of people, and I know half these people know every word I'm going to say before I even say it. They could probably finish my sentences for me, but there's one person over there who's never been here before, and I'm going to say something directed at that one new guy, hoping that, and what's going to happen, he's going to walk up to me after the meeting and say, man, of all the things that were said in the meeting that night, what you said really made a lot of sense, and I'm going to give that some thought. And it's usually something along the lines of selfishness versus selflessness, giving of yourself, and finding and the spiritual solutions, and how to get close to God is what you do with your life, not what you think. The faith without works is dead, which is the premise of the 12th step. Usually something along those lines that actually sinks into somebody, and that's where my thoughts are. Is when I know there's a room full of people that know all about recovery, I always think to myself, why would I want to go to a meeting where everybody has 20 years of sobriety? I'm looking for the meetings where there's a bunch of those new kids coming in on those vans, hoping that maybe they probably won't get sober this week, but within a few years, the repetition of the same things that we say over and over again will sink in, and who knows, maybe in 15 years from now, they're going to be at some kind of big book meeting chairing the damn thing and not giving any thought to where the information came from, but it's up there and it's in their head. But anyway, the moral to the story is how many sponsees you have is entirely up to how many sponsees you want when you find the right combination and what to do and where to go. And that, to me, is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I used to sit around and go, oh, well, nobody asked me to sponsor them. I can't sponsor anybody if they never ask me. And then I'd raise my hand and go, I had a flat tire today, and I had an argument with the boss, and like a little kid. I used to have this counselor at my halfway house when I was at the House of Hope, and I probably beat that poor guy to death. When I heard he drank about 5 years after I left there, I go, no wonder. All he did was sit there and listen to me throw up all over him every time I walked into his office. And then it was next, and the next guy would go in there and throw up all over him. It was like he was some kind of sponge for everybody's problems or something. Instead of sitting there telling us, talking about your problems really is not the solution to them. You give them to God through the 12 steps. The 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, we give our problems to God. And in 12, we turn our attention to others to get out of those problems based on the idea that they're all about self. We are on page 90 in the chapter Working with Others. This whole chapter, 15 pages? Yeah, 15 pages is dedicated to not so much explaining the 12th step as explaining how to work with others, as how to bring other people through the 12 steps. And, some of the things that they instruct us to do are things like don't bring up religion. Remember, it says we are not allied with any sect, denomination. That sect part is religious sect. We're not organized. We're not allied with any religious sect. And where we get that from is from the Oxford groups. And it's one of the reasons that Alcoholics Anonymous has had the high success rate, because we don't tell people what God to believe in. We just say, well, whatever God it is that you find, we're going to help you get closer to that God. And any kind of religious theme to your 12-step work handicaps you, not the people that you're trying to help. Okay, because it really limits the amount of people that you can help. A lot of people have really turned off to religion, and they're just not into listening to religious. Anyway, some of the other items that are in here are where to find sponsees, and we read that last week, I should say. It wasn't yesterday. Some of the phrases are, you can easily find some priests, ministers, rabbis, hospitals, sanitariums, and these people will be, tell them what you're doing, and they'll be glad to point you to some alcoholics that you can work with. And one of the things that I've been bringing up in some of the meetings that I go to lately is that things have changed over the last 70 years or so, and I don't know anybody who goes out looking for alcoholics to work with in hospitals, sanitariums. We usually just sit in AA meetings and wait for somebody to say, "Hey, will you help me through the steps or something?" But anyway, we'll get into that a little as we work our way through the rest of this chapter. And one of the things I want to bring up is that the 12th step. I'll tell you what, to cross-reference the 12th step just for a minute, and we'll probably do this every week. Go back to page, I think it's 13 or 15, Bill's story. 13, yeah, it's 15. Page 15 in Bill's story is a pretty good, actually it's the bottom of 14 and the top of 15. It's a paragraph that's split between those two pages. And this is Bill Wilson's, not the whole explanation of step 12, but this is one of the spots where he says, if you don't do the 12th step and help others through the 12 steps, don't be surprised when you don't stay sober. It's essentially what it's saying, that people who don't stay sober are people who don't help others through the 12 steps. And the 12 steps aren't rocket science. They can be easily explained within a couple of hours by someone who knows what they're talking about. I mean, some of the most basic ideas and premises of the 12 steps can be easily seen, in these pages. And here on the bottom of page 14, Bill Wilson writes that this is his friend Ebby Thatcher from that other place, the Oxford groups, that was like one of the founding, that was the foundation, that was where Alcoholics Anonymous really was born. Both Bob and Bill were members of the Oxford groups when they developed their own little quirk of doing things their own way, and they separated from the Oxford groups and became Alcoholics Anonymous. My friend had emphasized, and this is Ebby Thatcher, who, one of the stories in here, this is Ebby Thatcher, Bill Wilson's boyhood friend, as he calls him. And he had been sober, I think it was a couple of months or something, or whether a month or whatever it was. And they actually sent this guy over to Bill. They said, go find some alcoholics, go find somebody to help. And he goes, I know just the guy. I'm going to go over and help my old friend Bill. He's a heavy drinker. So he says here, my friend had emphasized the absolute necessity. Absolute necessity. That's a pretty profound statement right there. How many people do you know in AA sponsor people with that amount of dedication that it's an absolute necessity to saving their lives, of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs? Now, when he's talking about the principles in all my affairs, don't think that he's talking about those principles. They keep trying to hang those things on the wall in here, and I toss them in the can when no one's looking. Those are not, that's not AA. It's none of our literature. There's nothing about that principles behind the steps that even remotely is AA. And that's not what he's talking about here. When he says that the necessity of demonstrating these principles in all our affairs, he's talking basically about the three spiritual solutions that we have in AA. And one of those is forgiveness. The next one is making amends, which is easily seen in 8 and 9. Forgiveness you have to dig to find. Forgiveness is outlined in step 4 and 6 and 7. Actually, there's a little bit of it in 5 too, where you admit what it is that you've done wrong, and that's part of the forgiveness process. But when they say demonstrating these principles in all your affairs, they're essentially talking about finding what's blocking you from God and applying the spiritual solutions to be free of that. That's what they're talking about. And those principles are easily seen in the forgiveness and the faith and the making of amends and the admission in step 5. But anyway, particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Particularly was it imperative. So there's some words he's saying here that absolute necessity and imperative. It is an imperative and it is absolute necessity if you are going to stay sober. And if you think you're going to hang around here for 6, 8 months, a year and go, well, I've only got 6 or 8 months. Yeah, Bill Wilson started AA with 6 months of sobriety. Dr. Bob only had like 2 weeks I think he had 3 months of sobriety when Bill left him. And literally, like the home base of AA was Akron, essentially. And there's Dr. Bob with 3 months of sobriety and literally the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous. And these people were no different than you and I. They were drunken bums at the end of their rope, at the end of their life. So we got imperative and absolute necessity. to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. Now, this is what we do in AA. We perfect and enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. And how do we have this self-sacrifice? By setting aside time to help others through the 12 steps. That's essentially what he's saying here, that we enlarge our spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. And if you fail to perfect and enlarge your spiritual life, you're going to drink again. This is what he says. He says he could not survive. If you don't do this, you could not survive the trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work with others, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it was just like that. He's essentially saying there, if you don't do the 12th step, you don't stand much of a chance if you're a real alcoholic. There's another place in here in the... we're only going to read a little bit of that chapter if you haven't figured that out. We only read like a page or two a week. This is one of the best places I've seen it in, and it's the foreword to the second edition. And the foreword to the second edition, blah, 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 is on page XVI. At the bottom of the page on XVI, which was page 16, if you read Roman numerals very well. I'm used to reading Roman numerals fairly well, but not when they get real big, like 5,298 or something like that. That's when I have trouble with them. But this one is fairly easy. Okay, at the bottom of the page, what does this foreword to the second edition say? It says, Bill, I'll give you a brief history of what up to this point it has said. If you haven't read it, it's fairly simple. It says Bill Wilson had stayed sober for 6 months, and his sobriety was over. He was standing outside of a bar, and he was going in to have a drink. If you don't know what you're reading there, that's what he's saying. He's saying, I stood outside the bar, and I could hear the gay chatter inside. I thought if I didn't go in there and steal a little bit of the atmosphere, I wasn't going to make it through the night. So he's saying right here that he was on his way in. He was standing outside the door of that bar going, I'm going to drink. And he looked over, and there's a telephone over there. And he made a sane decision and made a phone call to this guy in Akron, Ohio, when he's from New York. But then at the bottom of that page, you'll see like the second line up where he says, this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. Meaning that Bill Wilson's being an alcoholic and helping Dr. Bob was the turning point in his life. That, that two alcoholics could relate to one another, whereas these other people who were trying to help him were ministers and doctors and townsfolk who just really couldn't relate to an alcoholic. They tried to look at Bob and go, hey, come on, Bob, pick yourself up, buddy. You were a pretty smart guy, headstrong. You had everything together. Get up. And we look at each other and we really don't say things like that. We say, I know what it's like to be down there. Here, try some of these step work here. So this is what he's talking about here. He says, this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another alcoholic as no non-alcoholic could. And this is the part I was getting at. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. Vital to permanent recovery. That ought to be something, instead of these little silly things, keep an open mind, we ought to put that up there. Vital to permanent. One alcoholic working with another is vital to permanent recovery. Okay? How many people do you know around here stress the importance of that, to say that how important that is? Most people I come across come in here and go, hey, make some coffee, hang out, push the chairs in, maybe sweep the floor or something. And then they go, what happened, man? I tried that AA thing and it just didn't work. Yeah. You know why? Because most of the people who might say something like that aren't doing it themselves. So it's hard to say, hey, you ought to be working with others. And they go, well, where's your sponsees? And he goes, well, I'm just hanging out. So it's hard to say something like that if you're not doing it yourself, right? But anyway, here's another one. In that same page, XVII, which is 17, he says, hence the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving at the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Frantically. Vital to permanent recovery. Strenuous work, one alcoholic with another. Vital to permanent recovery. And they're working frantically upon alcoholics. What were those other words? I'm going to remember these things one of these days. I'm going to have them memorized. the severity, the seriousness of this, the intensity of how he's explaining this, and geez, now I forgot here. There he goes. Absolute necessity, and what was the other one? Imperative. It's imperative. It is an absolute necessity. It is vital to permanent recovery, and these men did it almost frantically working with alcoholics, and that's what kept them sober. And people come strolling in here, and they hang out for 6 months and go, I tried that AA thing. That didn't work. What else you got? All right, so back out to the chapter Working with Others on page 90, which is, we're only going to read about a page, and then the next week I'll open up the floor for open discussion. And we were on page 90. And he says here, when you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him. If he does not, now remember, this is in 1939. These people, there is no AA meeting to go to. Their town doesn't even have an AA. They may have an Oxford group, but they don't have any AA meetings. There's no sponsor. You don't have a sponsor. You have a book. At the end of that chapter, Vision for You, he says, though you be but one man with this book in your hand. This book was written to be your sponsor, and this chapter was written to be your guide on how to help others through the 12 steps. When you find somebody, he says, when you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him. And remember, he's probably gone to a hospital or a sanitarium or some priest at the local church and said, look, I'm trying to work this solution thing to alcohol we got here. Do you have any drunks that I can work with? And the priest may say, oh, yeah, we got a doozy, Ralphie over here on whatchamacallit. Let me introduce you to him. He's sleeping behind a shed right now, okay? Something along those lines. And that's how he found it. That's how you might be expected to find somebody to work with at the time. If he does not want to stop, find out all you can about him. If he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste your time trying to persuade him. You may spoil a later opportunity. This advice is given for his family also. So you see where he's given advice to, say that there's a drunk in the family and someone buys this book trying to figure out how to work with the drunk in their family. There's a lot of that in here because where we came from was the Oxford groups, and the Oxford groups did not focus on alcoholics. It just so happens they stumbled across Ebby Thatcher and Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. These are three of the people that the Oxford groups ended up working with, but they worked with anybody and everybody. And that's why Bill and them decided to separate, was because they had somewhat of a difference of opinion, where these other people in the Oxford group said, Bill, you've been focusing on alcoholics. You need to start helping other people, too. And Bill said, no, I don't think so. I'm going to focus on alcoholics. And after about 4 years of that, back and forth with these people, they said, you know what, I think we're just going to separate from you guys, and we're going to do our own little thing over here. And they said, fine with us. But anyway, there's a lot of that about, and comes of age. There's a lot of that information about exactly how that stuff happened. And I think it's important, too, to me. I mean, it's important. When you've been sober for a while, you'll see that it's not enough just to know some of the basics, and you're going to want to find out more about Alcoholics Anonymous. Either that or you got to continue to grow, as they say. You got to continue to grow in your understanding of the steps, and that's a lot of what Comes of Age has in there. They have instructions on how they came to those steps. They don't just say, well, we did this, and this is the traditions, too. That the traditions took some 10 or 12 years before and some of the goofy things they did to work out those the traditions and the 12 suggestions for world service or whatever, they worked all those out. But anyway, back to what we were reading here. This advice is given also for his family. And when you read on in this book, you're going to find the chapter to wives, the family afterward, and the chapter to employers, because this book was written to try to help those people. That chapter to wives was written to help the wife understand how to help her alcoholic husband, or vice versa, the husband to help his alcoholic wife. Of course, assuming that most of the people were, men back then, but things have changed. But anyway, that goes back to our roots of where we came from in the Oxford groups. And the Oxford groups, not just focusing on alcoholics. I've always titled those chapters out there, the wives, the working with others, as the 12 steps are for everyone. Therefore, and you'll read that in here too, as you're reading through the steps, he'll say something along the lines of, that the husband getting sober, or not so much the husband, but the alcoholic getting sober, was going to want to try to bring these spiritual solutions to his family also, to live a spiritual life, to get his family. Because if you've got one person who's growing spiritually, and this person has other people in their life that are not growing spiritually, that the relationship between those people is probably not going to be well. It's kind of like, I heard somebody say, look, if you got a boyfriend and a girlfriend in AA, and one of them's drinking and one of them's not, it's probably not going to work out. But if you got two people who are drinking, they're going to be able to stick together because they're both in the birds of a feather type thing. If you got two people who are sober, they're going to be able to work it out. And you got two people who are drinking, they're going to be able to work it out. But if you got one who's drinking and one who's not, there's a good chance that's not going to work out. But it's the same way with an alcoholic and his family. If you got to, it's going to be hard to deal with each other. So the alcoholic is going to want to try to help his family with these spiritual solutions also. Therefore, he says, this advice is given for his family also. They should be patient, realizing they are dealing with a sick person. If there is any indication that he wants to stop, have a good talk with the person most interested in him, usually his wife. Get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leanings. You need this information to put yourself in his place, to see how you would like to approach him if the tables were turned. Sometimes it is wise to wait until he goes on a binge. The family may object to this, but unless he is in a dangerous physical condition, it is better to risk it. Don't deal with him when he is very drunk, unless he is ugly and the family needs your help. Wait for the end of a spree, or at least for a lucid interval. Then let his family or friend ask him if he wants to quit, for good, and if he wants to go to any extreme to do so, and if he would go to any extreme to do so. If he says yes, then his attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. You should be described to him as one of a fellowship who, as part of their own recovery, try to help others who will be glad to talk to him if he cares to see you. So you see that part there. You should be described to him as one of a fellowship who, as part of their own recovery, try to help others. And now remember that if you think about this just for a minute, this is almost within a few weeks of you stopping drinking, you should be at this point. If he does not want to see you, never force yourself upon him. Neither should the family hysterically plead with him to do anything, nor should they tell him much about you. They should wait for the end of his next drinking bout. There's a reason why that they wait for the end of these drinking bouts, because generally, and it was my experience too, that I would go on these little like benders or sprees. Some of mine would usually last 2 or 3 months or 4 months, and then I'd usually end up stopping because of jail, but or something bad happening, losing a job, getting kicked out of the house, whatever the hell it was. But there's a reason for that, and that is that there's this deflation of the ego that usually takes place at the end of these sprees. And why the spree sort of ends and they get a week or 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of sobriety is because that they just, you get to the end of your rope and you just can't take it anymore, and it gets so bad. And usually people end up in like detoxes or rehabs at these points, and that's the best point to approach these people, is when they're the most willing to do the work that you're going to give them to do, that they're most they're at the lowest point in their drinking, and they're thinking, I'll do anything to stop drinking. But within a week or so after they stop drinking, they start to restore themselves, and they go, you know what, I think it wasn't so bad, I don't need that. But when you get them right at that low point of the drinking, that's the best place to come across somebody. They should wait for the end of his next drinking bout. You might place this book where he can see it in the interval. Here, no specific rule can be given. The family must decide these things, but urge them not to be over-anxious, for that might spoil matters. Usually the family should not try to tell your story. When possible, avoid meeting a man through his family. Approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. Most of the people that Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob helped early on were Actually, everybody that Dr. Bob helped was in that Akron City Hospital. And if you'll go out to Dr. Bob's Nightmare, you'll see right in the beginning there, it says that he helped over 5,000 alcoholics through that hospital. He was a doctor at the Akron City Hospital. And when Bill Wilson broke up, and actually he left Akron, Ohio after 3 months and went back to New York, he went to that Knickerbocker Hospital where he detoxed, and later went to there's another hospital, Charles B. Towns Hospital, I think. One of them was right there at Central Park or something, New York. I don't know. There's more about that in It Comes of Age. But all the people that they were helping at the time were at the hospital, and then usually in the psych ward or the detox ward, if there was a detox. But I think the detox ward really is a psych ward or something, because most of them want to end their lives and stuff, But approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. If your man needs hospitalization, he should have it, but not forcibly unless he is violent. Let the doctor, if he will, tell him, let the doctor, if he will, tell him he has something in the way of a solution. Well, we're going to stop right there, and that'll give everybody about 5 minutes to share on something, or ask any questions. We've learned that the whole reason for the first 11 steps is step 12. That why you make an inventory in step 4. Why do you have the spiritual solutions in 5 of admission, of forgiveness in 6 and 7, making amends in steps 8 and 9 to be free of the most common manifestations of self. What this is all about is to bring us to become a person who does things for other people, and doesn't come up with an excuse when someone asks you for sponsor. Actually, you know what? My experience with sponsorship has been that most people really don't go after sponsees. They'll just sit in a meeting and wait for somebody to say, "Will you help me through the steps?" And that, I think, may be one of the reasons why so many people in AA today. And there's like this, I don't know. When I first got sober 21 years ago, the thing was 3% of you are going to make it. The other 97% ain't going to make it. And I think it's a lot higher. And I think it's like Bill says, it's about 75 to 80% when you take into consideration the fact that he says of those who come in here and really try, not people who come. I mean, if you went to college and sat down and didn't do anything and never asked a teacher to teach them what they knew, and you never did any of the work involved, you just sat there and didn't do anything, would you say that you actually went to college, or would you say that you had to go there and actually do the work and turn in, get the grades and pass those courses? It's the same thing with AA. You can't just come in here and sit there and say, "Well, I tried the AA thing and it just didn't work for me." So the category, the I don't know what you'd call it, the description of people who come in here and really try is what he's saying. Those who come in here and really try, 75 to 80% sober up right away. I think he said 50%. No, wait a minute. I hate misquoting. It's in the, I think the foreword to the first edition. Blah, blah. Described in the blah, blah, blah. It's not there. Anyway, I don't have it marked. It's not in the doctor's opinion, I know. Those who come into AA and really tried. Now I lost it. What? Excess? What? I can't understand you. Really? XX. He must be better than me at this thing, huh? Yeah, you're right, isn't it? Yeah, I still don't see. Anyway, the point is that I think that the reason why so many people don't make it is that they don't do the 12th step. They say, "I'm working a program of recovery," but it's 12 steps of recovery, and the 12th step says that you help other people through the 12 steps. We're in the chapter working with others, and some of the descriptions that Bill uses in Bill's story, he says that this is an absolute necessity. It's not an absolute necessity that you do the first 11 steps. It's an absolute necessity that you sit down with one other alcoholic and take them through the steps. It's an absolute necessity, and it is imperative. The words that he uses, it is imperative that you work with others as he had worked with me, he said. It's vital to permanent recovery in the foreword to the second edition. Vital to permanent recovery that you sit down with one other alcoholic and help them through the steps. And some of the things that I've heard over the years from the men that I work with through the steps is that, I don't really know the steps, so how can I teach them? Yeah, but nobody ever gets to this point where they're like the master of the 12 steps before they start helping others. You got to start out as someone who just knows a little bit. I'll teach you what I know. I'll do the best I can. And then year after year goes by, maybe a decade goes by, and you become very good at taking people through the 12 steps. It's sort of a catch-22 that I know that a lot of the guys that I work through the steps with put themselves in a position in which they can't help other people until they get a little time and some knowledge about the steps. But guess what? They're not going to get some time and some knowledge about the steps because they're not helping other people. Because Bill Wilson describes it as being an absolute necessity, and it is imperative, and it is vital to permanent recovery. And those are Bill Wilson's words. But here we are. We're in the chapter working with others, and some of the things that we're reading here is that this example that Bill Wilson's given us here. Perhaps you're not acquainted with any drinkers who want to recover. You can easily find some by asking a few doctors, ministers, priests, hospitals. They will only be too glad to assist you. Nobody does that anymore. Like I said, we sit in an AA meeting and we wait for somebody to walk up and say, "Will you sponsor me?" And see, there's a problem with that, in that people who don't have any time in AA are less likely to be approached for sponsorship. If you say, "I got 6 months of sobriety," and keep in mind, Bill Wilson, the words of the book says that Bill Wilson had worked with dozens of alcoholics in his before he went to Akron and met Dr. Bob, it states that he had worked with dozens of alcoholics. That could be 24, that could be 36, who knows? But he failed to sober any of them up. But he stayed sober himself, it says. And with 6 months of sobriety, he had met Dr. Bob, and Dr. Bob was the first one to get sober. The moral to the story is that if you want to stay sober, you have to work with other people. That's why so many people are not staying sober when they come in here. They come in here and go, "I don't know, man, I keep getting 3 months, and I drink, and 6 months, and I drink, and there may be something else underlying. Maybe the guy who took them through the 4, 5, 6, and 7, those steps didn't know what he was doing. Maybe they haven't completely done, as he says, the third step is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we walk to freedom. It's a vital and crucial step. The third step is important that you do it properly. I was thinking, same with all the steps. I don't know why anybody would say the first step's the only one you need to work 100%. And Bill wrote that in the 12 and 12, and I think that's one of the worst things he ever did, because it's almost like a free pass to by the time you get out to step 7 and 8, you could be down to 20, 30%. Who cares? Whatever. Just as long as you do that first step 100%, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. It's like it's a free pass to not give it your all in the rest of the steps. And I believe, like he says in the third step, that the third step was a turning point. We asked for his protection and care with complete abandon, not like when he says half measures availed us nothing. Those are all phrases directing us to the third step. There are like 7 pages, 6.5 pages that are dedicated to step 3, and those words are found in those pages. Half measures availed us nothing is a reference to step 3, not just all the steps, but it's found within the pages of the third step. But anyway, here we are. We're talking about Bill Wilson's working with this guy here. So in the second paragraph down from 91, he says, "When your man is better," this is after he's gone on a bender, and this is the best time to approach somebody after they've gone on a bender, because they have been deflated again, they've been smashed by alcohol again, and they're more receptive and more willing to listen and more eager to do the work involved. That you catch them 3 or 4 or 5 weeks after they've had this deflation, and they're less likely to go, "Okay, I'm going to give it my everything." But when they're like on the ground and they're like feeling like I don't want to do it anymore, they're more likely to be receptive to the ideas. "When your man is better, the doctor might suggest a visit from you. Though you have talked with the family, leave them out of the first discussion. Under these conditions, your prospect will see he is under no pressure. He will feel he can deal with you without being nagged by his family. Call him while he is still jittery. Call on him while he is still jittery, sorry. He may be more receptive when depressed. Being, he just got smashed by alcohol again. See your man alone, if possible. At first, engage in general conversation. After a while, turn the talk to some phrase of drinking. Tell him enough about your drinking habits, symptoms, and experiences to encourage him to speak of himself. Now, this is because, the idea that one alcoholic can affect another alcoholic like no non-alcoholic can. And to me, that was in the form of, say, you come across people in your family and they see you down and out and they say, look at you, you're a mess. Pick yourself up, will you? Be a man, step up to the plate and all this. And then, if you just put some willpower to it, they don't understand alcoholism. That's why one alcoholic can affect another alcoholic. And the analogy that Bill Wilson gives of the people who have suffered the same common peril, who've been through a shipwreck back in, I think it's There Is a Solution. He says, we are like the people who've been through a shipwreck. We feel as though we have a common bond to one another, that one alcoholic can affect and can help another alcoholic because we've suffered the same common peril. And this shipwreck thing came from, I'm guessing, which was 1912, when there was a lot of shipwrecks back at the time, but everybody knows about the Titanic and the Lusitania, and they go down, and like 1,000 people go down with it. And so that's why he brought up that, because it was, at the time, it was probably like today, it would be in the form of like, I don't know, the oil wars or maybe the space shuttle blowing up or something. To speak of himself. If he wishes to talk, let him do so. You will thus get a better idea of how you ought to proceed. If he is not communicative, give him a sketch of your drinking career up to the time you quit, but say nothing for the moment of how that was accomplished. And another thing is, keep in mind that this guy has never been introduced to AA. At this time, there is no AA. When this book was written, Alcoholics Anonymous was in like 3 cities. It was in Akron, it was in New York, and it was in Cleveland. And those were like the only, there was maybe a couple of people in a couple of other cities that weren't really organized yet, but those were like the 3 primary places that this AA was at the time. If he is in a serious mood, dwell on the troubles liquor has caused you, being careful not to moralize or lecture. Because that's to moralize and lecture is what he's been getting from the preacher, the doctor, his wife, his family members, his mother and father. They've all been telling him what a piece of dirt he was, and he needs to stop doing this and pick himself up. So if you start doing this, he's just going to, like, a wall comes down. Bam! Oh, another one of these people. Great. If the mood is light, tell him humorous stories of your escapades. Get him to tell some of his. And remember, what he's trying to do here is make a connection to the guy, so that he's going to be a little more receptive to and, we don't really have to deal with a lot of this today. Most of the guys I run into have been in and out of AA for years. They know all about, the connection's been made. So, but you got to put yourself in the position of the way this book was written at the time. It was. Remember what it also says about the book. It was that this book was meant to be your sponsor. It says, though you be but one man with this book in your hand, you may be asking yourself, how could I even hope to have the success that you guys has? And he says something about, you forget you have just tapped a source of power. It's only a matter of willingness to recreate the success that we have had in Akron and New York. And this might be in Butte, Montana with some guy who's, 92. Tell him how baffled you were, how you finally learned that you were sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop, and, the struggles you made to stop that failed. Show him how the mental twist that leads to the first drink of a spree, the idea that Dr. Silkworth gave us, that we develop an obsession that it all starts out with an obsession for the first one, and we somehow convince ourselves that I can do just one again, and I'll stop. Maybe 1 or 2 and stop, but we know for a fact that will not happen, and where that obsession and the insanity of that obsession overwhelms us. The show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink of a spree. We suggest you do this as we have done it in the chapter on alcoholism. If he is an alcoholic, he will understand you at once. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. If you are satisfied that he is a real alcoholic, and there's where a lot of people get that term, a real alcoholic, and I think a lot of people make fun of that because, just to stop for a minute and say, I think it's important, my personal opinion after 21 years in sobriety, it is important to tell new people that not everybody in AA is as serious as alcoholic as I was. Not everybody who sits in this room and says that they have 10 years of sobriety and they have been coming to AA for 10 years because they don't sponsor anybody and they don't do any of the steps. And they talk about how I've never been through the steps. I don't sponsor anybody. I stayed sober 10 years. Well, I tell you what, pal, you are nothing like me because for me, I am a hopeless variety. And that's one of the words that he uses in one of the other chapters. A hopeless variety alcoholic is someone in which only a spiritual experience will overcome this mental obsession for the first one. And the problem is in AA, and it's just my opinion, it was handed down to me from a couple of old guys a while back. The problem is that a new man comes in here and he's looking around, watching people to see who does what, so that you can either mimic them or don't do what they do or don't do what they do. You don't want to do what the guy who keeps relapsing is doing, and you do want to do what the guy who's been sober for 20 years. So this guy says he's got 10 years of sobriety, and he sponsors no one, doesn't do the steps, so it kind of throws the whole program of AA off out the window, and it's like, just hang around here, you'll sober up. And that gives it half measures availed us nothing, so we tried an easier, softer way. It gives me, in my opinion, it gives me the right to say, well, I can just sit here and do nothing for a few years and see how that works out. And then you drink again and you go, oh, that AA ain't working for me, Yeah, but you never really gave it the what do you say? Those who come to AA and really tried, how many, and what does he say about with all the desperation, the drowning grasp a life preserver? How many people do you see with that desperation coming in here? I tell you, even the people that I see who are nearly going to put a bullet in their head don't come in here and do that. But the point being, now I lost where I was. Oh, I know, I think I see him. He will match your inconsistency if you are satisfied. He is a real alcoholic. That's what I was getting at. Was many people use this term. They say, I am a real alcoholic. And then that gives you the idea, well, there's some people in here who are not real alcoholics. But you see, here's the problem with that term, real alcoholic, is that there are Bill Wilson gives in the chapter to wives, four types of alcoholics. He doesn't mention types, he just says numbers. Suppose your husband is alcoholic number 1. Suppose your husband is alcoholic number 2. And then he goes on and he describes what these alcoholics' behavior is. Number 1 goes on an occasional weekend spree. He's mostly unaffected by alcohol, but does have trouble. Maybe he gets a DUI, a fight with a wife or something. And then he progresses on till you get to alcoholic number 4, in which this guy's sole reason to live is to drink, and that's all he does. He's nearly in the gutter. And then he goes on to say that alcoholic number 1, alcoholic number 2, and number 3 can all stop when things get bad enough. All they do is they say, you know what, things are really bad for me, I am never going to take another drink, and that's it, they stop. And they come in here and say, I got 10 years of sobriety, and I didn't work the steps, and I ain't got no God, and they go on to profess that they were, and see, here's the thing, is they are not like me. There's nothing on that door over there that says the requirement for membership of this bottom line or any of these alcoholic meetings is that you be a hopeless variety alcoholic of the number 4 category, in which only a spiritual experience. And if you're not one of these, you got to hit the road. You're out of here. We got a guy over there who kicks these people out, but that's not it. People can come in here and say that they're sober 10 years and were not an alcoholic like me, in which my sole reason for living and existence was to drink, and that's all there was to it. It's like the reason I went to work was so I could get money to drink. The reason I had an apartment was because I needed a place to sleep while I was drinking. The reason I had a car because I had to get to the place where I went to work to make money. So you understand that my whole reason, everything that I did revolved around my drink, whereas these other people have somewhat of a normal life, okay? But the point that I'm trying to make is that it's important to let people know that if you are a real alcoholic of the hopeless variety in which only a spiritual solution will release you of the obsession for that first drink, then you had better go after helping other people through the 12 steps. Like, what does he say? What are the words? Is absolute necessity, it is imperative, and it is vital to permanent recovery. You understand that? And here we got all these new people coming in here and saying, well, you can't really help people through the 12 steps until you become a master and learn them real good. You don't want to go out there and look like an idiot, because I got to tell you, I looked like an idiot for years. It must have been 5 years of sponsoring people before I actually started to zero in on the real steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I feel sorry for the guys that I worked with for those first, but I tell you what, one of the things that I say is that a failed attempt at helping somebody through the 12 steps is better than no attempt at all. If I never made any attempt whatsoever to help any of those guys, and when I didn't know much about the steps, then what would have been better? Not helping them at all? I don't think so. I made some attempt to help them. I reached out to them. But anyway, back to the reading. Begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition surrounding that first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. And that's where the reason that he's dwelling on this is what we call it from the doctor's opinion, the obsession that develops within our head for that first drink. We got the obsession for the first drink, and it always comes, and to me it always sounded like this. It's been like a week or two. It's been a while since your last one. I think you can do one and stop, maybe two. But I know I can't do one and stop, but somehow my brain goes, yeah, that's it. I can do one, stop this time and I'm looking around going, where in the hell did that come from? What are you, stupid? You've been going through this for year after year and you still have no defense. What happens? I go do one. Out of nowhere, there I am with I remember I used to drive home. I'd drive my car home, and then in a blackout, and not even remember any of it, and go out and look out the window and go, oh shit, the car's in the driveway. Let me go see if it's dinged up. But that's the same kind of blackout that I was in. I consider it to be anyway. When I ended up with a first drink in my hand all the time, it'd be like, man, what happened? How did I end up with a drink in my hand again? I know that this is year after year. This was happening to me. And that's what he's talking about when he says, show him from your own experience how the queer mental condition surrounding that first drink prevents normal functioning of the willpower. And the reason he's bringing this up is because this is where AA comes in. AA comes in on the premise that after you've had that first drink, the 12 steps ain't going to do a damn thing for you. Your defense is going to come against the first drink. And he states that everything that happens after you've had that first drink is all academic. Whether you're saying you tried to drink just beer, so you didn't want to stay on the hard stuff, you just wanted to smoke a little doob or something, it doesn't matter what it is, it's all academic, it is irrelevant, it means nothing. Your defense must come against the first drink, and that's how AA does. AA is a program that states we try to get to the underlying causes and conditions of why this queer mental condition surrounding the first drink prevents us from functioning with the normal willpower. Anyway, don't at this stage refer to this book unless he has seen it and wishes to discuss it. And be careful not to brand him as an alcoholic. Let him draw his own conclusions. If he sticks to the idea that he can still control his drinking, tell him that possibly he can. If he is not too alcoholic. You see how he's saying that? And remember what we know, too, is alcoholism is progressive. One of the things that Bill Wilson also writes out in the chapter to wives is that he gives these 4 numbers of alcoholics, alcoholic number 1, alcoholic number 2, and he also states that almost all of us have progressed through these numbers. I started out as alcoholic number 1. I progressed into the condition of alcoholic number 2, and I have progressed over the years into the condition of alcoholic number 4, in which I am a hopeless variety now, and a hopeless variety in which only a spiritual experience will overcome that obsession for the first one. So he says, if he is not too alcoholic, but insists that if he is severely afflicted, there may be little chance he can recover by himself. I'm going to open up, I'll do a little more reading. Continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. And remember back in the 4th step, he calls it a spiritual malady. A spiritual malady. Talk about the conditions of body and mind which accompany it. Keep his attention focused mainly on your personal experience. Explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it will serve some good purpose. Making a reference to most alcoholics at this time were only dealt with through the what today would be called the psych ward of the hospital. There was no the detoxes was like the county jail, and then they'd let you go, or they'd take you over to if you were like really bad, take you over to the hospital and tie you down. There were no detoxes, halfway houses, sober houses. All the things that we enjoy today were not there at that time. Doctors are rightly loath to tell alcoholic patients the whole story unless it will serve some good purpose. But you may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you offer a solution. You will soon have your friend admitting he has many, if not all of the traits of the alcoholic. If his own doctor is willing to tell him that he is an alcoholic, so much the better, even though your protege. So there's another phrase that was out before the sponsor thing. Your protege may not have entirely admitted his condition, meaning step 1, I'm guessing. He has become very curious to know how you got well. Let him ask you that question, if he will. Tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely. If the man be atheist or agnostic, and this is one of my favorite examples that he uses. I got this circled here. That he's talking about and dealing with people who are atheist or agnostic. And to be honest with you, most people are. I think Bill writes in the chapter to the agnostic that 50% of all people who come into AA are either atheist or agnostic, and later become converts to, I believe there's something there. I don't know. It's not a religious thing or anything. It's to believe that there is a power greater than yourself idea. But what he's talking about here is he's going to be saying, don't just come right out with the spiritual thing, because the religious people have already tried that, and it's sort of like to pick yourself up, look at you, you bum, you're always like this. Be a man, put some willpower to it. But what he's going to be getting at here is that what we do in AA is generally referred to by us as a spiritual solution to a spiritual malady, but what we also have is real-world descriptions of this. And one of the best descriptions I heard was my sponsor used to say, look, dummy, it's this easy, and AA is this simple. If you do good, you're going to feel good about who you are. And if you do bad, you're going to feel bad about who you are. What does an alcoholic do that feels bad about who he is? Alcohol makes us feel good, so we turn to alcohol. That's a simple way of describing the spiritual feature of our program. And even Bill writes in here. He writes, though these alcoholics knew they must help other people if they would remain sober, that motive became secondary. That the whole reason for the whole thing that we do here in AA, helping other people and getting through all the first 11 steps to get to step 12, it all becomes secondary, and it is transcended by the happiness we find in giving of ourselves for others. In other words, you're going to be when you it's a simple idea that fear is at the underlying cause and condition of the obsession that develops for the first drink, and how we combat that fear is on the premise that it's based in self, and that how we get out of self is by doing things for others and expecting nothing in return, because if you expect something in return for what you do, it cancels it out as a selfless act, and you will not get the benefits inside about feeling good about who you are by doing something for another person without unconditional love, is what the third step prayer says. Take away my difficulties, that victory over these difficulties will bear witness to those I would help of your love, your power, and your way of life. Which is a very simple idea, really. It really is. That doing things for other people is going to make you feel better about who you are, and you have to place no conditions on it, otherwise it won't count. And how we best become a person who does things for other people is by finding what keeps us from doing that. And the fourth step, anger, fear, and guilt, and applying the solutions to get rid of those things: forgiveness, amends, and faith. But anyway, back to what he's saying here. Tell him exactly what happened to you. Stress the spiritual feature freely. If the man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, and that's rooted in the Oxford groupers. The Oxford groups were early Christian people, but they didn't tell anybody what God to believe in. Provided it makes sense to him. The main thing is that he be willing to believe in a power greater than himself, and that he live by spiritual principles. And you can see how he's working through the steps here, like at the top of the page where he says he has not entirely admitted his condition, which would be a reference to he hasn't done the first step yet. And that was like the second step. Do you believe in God, yes or no? And this is what he says here. When dealing with such a person, you had better use everyday language to describe spiritual principles. You see, that was the point that I was trying to make there. In dealing with a person who may get angry, and the wall will come down when you start telling them about spiritual stuff and God and love and caring for others and all this, bam, down comes the wall. Oh, no, it's another one of those religious nut jobs going to try to save my soul, something along those lines. So what he's saying here is, when dealing with such a person, you had better use everyday language to describe spiritual principles, which is what I was referring to, which is that AA can be described in easy to understand everyday language. It doesn't have to involve the religious aspect. But anyway, we're going to open up the floor for open discussion. We got 20 minutes or so to